Hello viewers, welcome to my YouTube channel. Get ready for heart-touching stories. Don't forget to subscribe and let's begin.
The first snow of December always made me think of Margaret. She used to stand by the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of cocoa, watching the flakes fall like tiny miracles. "It's the quiet that I love," she'd say. "The world finally slows down long enough to breathe." This Christmas there was no quiet, not inside my house. There was noise, laughter that didn't include me, voices that skimmed past me, and the clinking of glasses raised in conversations I wasn't part of. And Margaret. Well, Margaret had been gone 3 years now. I stood in the hallway, adjusting my sweater for the third time. It was the one she'd bought me years ago, dark green, slightly too big, with a tiny tear near the cuff that I never got around to fixing. She used to say it made me look distinguished. Now it just made me feel old. "Are you just going to stand there all night?" my eldest, Brian, called from the dining room. His voice carried that familiar edge, impatience disguised as humor. "I'm coming," I said softly, though I wasn't sure anyone heard me. The dining table was set beautifully, too beautifully, crystal glasses, polished silverware, and a centerpiece that looked like it belonged in a magazine. My daughter Claire had always been particular about appearances. "Careful," she snapped as I pulled out a chair. "Those plates are expensive." "I know how to sit, Claire," I said, forcing a smile. My youngest, Daniel, barely looked up from his phone. "Can we just eat already? I've got a call in an hour." I nodded and sat down. For a moment I let myself believe this could still feel like Christmas. Dinner began with polite chatter. Claire talked about her new kitchen renovation. Brian bragged about a promotion that seemed to matter more than anything else in his life. Daniel laughed at something on his phone and occasionally tossed in a comment that didn't quite fit the conversation. I tried to contribute. "I remember when your mother used to make this roast," I said gently. "Oh God, Dad," Brian interrupted. "Not everything has to be about Mom." The words hit harder than I expected. "I was just—" "We know," Claire said, cutting in. "But it's been 3 years, we're trying to move forward." Move forward, as if remembering Margaret was somehow holding them back. I lowered my gaze to my plate. "Sorry," I murmured. No one responded. Halfway through the meal, Daniel leaned back in his chair and smirked. "You know what this feels like?" he said. "Like we're hosting a charity dinner." Brian chuckled. "Yeah, the Take Care of Dad annual event." Laughed too, though she tried to hide it behind her napkin. I forced a weak smile, hoping they'd see it as a joke. But then Brian looked straight at me. "Honestly, Dad, you could try a little harder," he said. "You just sit there barely talking, acting all pathetic." The word hung in the air, pathetic. "Just listening," I said quietly. "Well, it's depressing," Claire added. "This is supposed to be a happy day," chest tight. "I didn't mean to." "Then don't," Brian snapped. Silence followed, a heavy, suffocating silence, and then Daniel said it. "Maybe you should just take your plate and eat in the living room," he suggested casually. "Give the rest of us some space." I looked up, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. Brian shrugged. "Honestly, not a bad idea." Nodded. "It might make things less awkward." Less awkward? I stared at them, my children, the ones I had raised, the ones Margaret and I had sacrificed everything for. "Go eat alone, old man," Daniel added, not even bothering to look at me. Something inside me cracked. For a moment I considered arguing. I considered reminding them of everything I had done. The nights I worked double shifts, the vacations I skipped so they could have better opportunities, the countless sacrifices that had shaped their lives. But the words never came. Instead, I picked up my plate slowly, carefully, and I stood. "Fine," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I walked out of the dining room without looking back. The living room was dimly lit, the glow of the Christmas tree casting soft shadows on the walls. I sat down in my old armchair, the one Margaret used to call my throne. For a long time I didn't eat, I just stared at the tree. At the ornaments we had collected over the years, each one held a memory. Brian's first handmade decoration, a crooked star made of cardboard and glitter. Claire's delicate glass angel. Daniel's obsession with those ridiculous plastic candy canes. I reached out and picked up one of the ornaments. A small, faded photograph of Margaret and me from our first Christmas together. We looked so young, so full of hope. "I'm sorry," I whispered, not to my children, to her. That's when I made the decision. It wasn't sudden, it wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, just like the snowfall she used to love. I set my plate down untouched. Then I stood, walked to the hallway, and grabbed my coat. No one noticed as I passed the dining room, or if they did, they didn't care enough to say anything. The cold air hit me like a slap. I breathed it in deeply, letting it fill my lungs. For the first time that evening I felt clear. I walked down the driveway, each step crunching against the snow, and I kept walking. An hour later I found myself at a small diner on the edge of town. It wasn't much, just a handful of booths, a flickering neon sign, and the smell of coffee that had been brewing all day. But it was warm and it was quiet. "Rough night?" the waitress asked as I slid into a booth. I smiled faintly. "Something like that," she nodded, as if she understood more than I had said. "What can I get you?" "Coffee," I replied, "and whatever's easiest." A few minutes later she returned with a plate of simple food in a steaming mug. "On the house," she said. "You don't have to." "It's Christmas," she interrupted gently. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Thank you." I ate. Something strange happened. The weight I had been carrying all evening started to lift, not completely, but enough to breathe, enough to think. And for the first time in years I allowed myself to consider something I had been avoiding. Maybe it was time to stop waiting for my children to remember who I was. Maybe it was time to remember it myself. Back at the house things had changed. I didn't know it yet, but my absence hadn't gone unnoticed for long. "Where's Dad?" Claire asked, glancing toward the living room. Brian shrugged. "Probably sulking." rolled his eyes. He'll be back. When they checked the living room, they found it empty. His coat was gone, his plate sat untouched, and suddenly the silence felt different. Left, Claire said, her voice uncertain. Brian frowned. He wouldn't just leave, wouldn't he? They searched the house, then the driveway, then the street, but there was no sign of me, and slowly realization began to creep in. We told him to eat alone, Daniel said, his voice quieter now. Claire's hands trembled. We didn't mean. Yes, we did, Brian cut in. No one argued. By the time I returned home, it was late, the house was dark, the laughter was gone, and for the first time in a long while it felt peaceful. I stepped inside, hanging my coat by the door. Dad, Claire's voice came from the living room. I turned to see all three of them standing there waiting. Their expressions were different now, not annoyed, not impatient, something else, something I hadn't seen in a long time. Where were you? Brian asked. I paused. Then I answered honestly. I went somewhere I felt welcome. The words hit harder than any accusation. I'm sorry, Claire said, her voice breaking. Daniel looked down. We didn't realize, Brian swallowed. We were out of line. I studied their faces, searching for sincerity, for understanding, and maybe, just maybe, I found it. I'm not asking for much, I said quietly. Just respect, just a place at the table. Filled Claire's eyes. You always have one, I nodded slowly. I hope so. That night didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the years of distance or the careless words that had been spoken, but it changed something important, because for the first time they saw me not as an obligation, not as a burden, but as a person, their father. And as I sat down with them again, this time by choice, not obligation, I realized something Margaret had always known. Family isn't just about being together, it's about how you treat each other when you are, and sometimes it takes losing someone, even for a moment, to remember their worth. That was the Christmas my children told me to eat alone, and the night they finally understood why I never should have.